On November 13, 2022, 4 University of Idaho students lost their lives in a brutal homicide that would capture national attention and reshape the community of Moscow. Idaho, the victims were Madison Mogen, age 21, Kaylee Goncalves, age 21, Xana Kernodle, age 20, and Ethan Chapin, age 20. All 4 were enrolled students actively engaged in their academic programs and campus social life. Madison Mogen was pursuing a degree in marketing, demonstrating interest in business and communications. Xana Kernodle shared this academic focus, also majoring in marketing. Kaylee Goncalves was studying general studies, exploring various disciplines before selecting a specialized path. Ethan Chapin had chosen recreation and sport management as his field, reflecting his involvement in athletic and recreational activities. Beyond their academic pursuits, these students participated in Greek life on campus. Mogen and Goncalves were members of the Pi Beta Phi sorority, which provided them with a network of friends and social opportunities. Kernodle was affiliated with the same sorority, strengthening the bond between the 3 women. Chapin was a member of the Sigma Chi fraternity, where he developed friendships and participated in campus events. Their involvement in these organizations demonstrated their integration into typical college routines. They attended classes, maintained social connections, and lived the normal lives of young adults pursuing higher education. Leading up to the night of November 13th, nothing distinguished their activities as unusual or concerning. The off-campus house where they lived accommodated 6 individuals total. On the night of the murders, 2 additional roommates were present in the residence. These 2 individuals survived the attack unharmed, though they were in the house during the time frame when the homicides occurred. This established a complex environment that would later become central to understanding the events of that early morning. The residence at 1122 King Road was a 3-story rental house situated off campus in Moscow, Idaho. Its location on a hillside created an unusual architectural feature. Entrances existed on both the first and second floors due to the sloping terrain. This elevation-based design meant that individuals could enter the house at multiple levels, depending on which side they approached from. The house contained 6 bedrooms distributed across its 3 floors, accommodating multiple student tenants. On the night of November 13, 2022, the victims were positioned on different levels of the structure. Madison Mogen and Kaylee Goncalves occupied a bedroom on the 3rd floor, the uppermost level of the house. Xana Kernodle and Ethan Chapin were located in a 2nd-floor bedroom. The 2 surviving roommates stayed in separate rooms within the house, though their exact floor positions have not been publicly specified in available records. This multi-level layout created physical separation between occupants. Sound transmission between floors in such structures can be limited, potentially affecting awareness of disturbances occurring on different levels. The presence of multiple bedrooms and floors meant that individuals in one area might not immediately detect unusual activity. Elsewhere in the house, the physical configuration of the residence became significant when examining how the attack unfolded and why certain individuals were targeted while others remained unharmed. The house's layout provided a factual framework for understanding the spatial relationships between victims and survivors during the critical early morning hours when the murders took place. The evening of November 12, 2022, began as a typical Saturday night for the University of Idaho students. Madison Mogen and Kaylee Goncalves spent part of the evening downtown in Moscow, visiting local establishments. Video surveillance and witness accounts confirmed their movements throughout the night. The 2 women returned to the house at 1122 King Road at approximately 1:56 a.m. on November 13th. Xana Kernodle and Ethan Chapin were also at the residence during the late evening and early morning hours. Their specific activities before the attack have been documented through investigative records, though detailed minute-by-minute timelines have not been publicly released beyond general placement within the house. As the early morning hours progressed, all 4 victims were inside the residence. The 2 surviving roommates were also present in their respective bedrooms. Based on evidence collected and analyzed by investigators, the murders occurred in a concentrated time frame between approximately 4:09 a.m. and 4:25 a.m. on November. 13 investigators determined that no obvious signs of forced entry were present at the scene. Reports indicated that a door to the residence had been left ajar, though the specific circumstances surrounding this detail remain unclear. Whether this was intentional, accidental, or related to the perpetrator's access has not been definitively confirmed in public records. During the estimated time frame of the attack, all 4 victims were in their respective bedrooms. The proximity of these rooms to one another and the separation from the surviving roommates, locations would later become relevant factors in understanding how the crime unfolded, without alerting all occupants simultaneously. The concentrated time frame suggested a rapid sequence of events within the house during those 25 minutes. All 4 victims died from multiple stab wounds inflicted with a sharp-edged weapon. The coroner's reports and subsequent investigative disclosures confirmed that each victim sustained numerous injuries consistent with a bladed instrument. The attacks were characterized by the repetitive nature of the wounds and the force applied during the assault. Evidence indicated that some victims attempted to defend themselves against their attacker. Defensive wounds were documented on certain individuals, demonstrating that they raised their hands or arms in efforts to block or deflect the weapon. These injuries provided forensic investigators with information about the sequence of events and the victims' awareness during the attack. Specific details regarding the severity of injuries varied among the 4 victims. Zana Knodel sustained more than 50 stab wounds, indicating an exceptionally violent and prolonged assault. The number and distribution of these injuries suggested sustained aggression directed at her specifically. Kaylee Goncalves suffered more than 20 stab wounds, representing another concentrated attack. Additionally, evidence indicated she experienced blunt force trauma and showed signs consistent with asphyxiation, suggesting multiple methods were employed during her murder. The nature of these injuries pointed to the extreme brutality of the attacks. The repetitive stabbing, combined with additional forms of violence in some cases, demonstrated the ferocity of the assault. Investigators noted that the weapon used would have been capable of inflicting deep, penetrating wounds, though the specific type of blade was not publicly identified beyond general characteristics. The forensic analysis of these injuries provided crucial information for investigators regarding the timeline, the weapon, and the physical dynamics of the attacks. However, the reports focused strictly on documenting the wounds and cause of death without speculation. Regarding the attacker's emotional state or underlying motivation, the bodies were discovered at the residence on November 13, 2022, prompting immediate law enforcement response. The Moscow Police Department assumed primary investigative responsibility for the case, given that the crime occurred within their jurisdiction. Due to the severity and complexity of the homicides, additional agencies quickly joined the effort. The Idaho State Police provided support personnel, forensic resources, and investigative expertise. Their involvement expanded the capacity to process the crime scene, conduct interviews, and analyze evidence. The Federal Bureau of Investigation also participated in the investigation, contributing specialized units, behavioral analysts, and technical support. This multi-agency collaboration reflected the scale and seriousness of the case. Public awareness of the murders spread rapidly throughout Moscow and across the nation. The Moscow community, unaccustomed to violent crime of this magnitude, reacted with shock and fear. Law enforcement agencies established tip lines and digital submission portals to collect information from the public. The response was substantial. Investigators received thousands of phone calls, emails, and digital submissions containing potential leads, observations, and theories. Processing this volume of information required significant resources and personnel. Investigators reviewed each submission to identify credible leads that could advance the case. The attention the murders received was partially due to Moscow's reputation as a quiet college town with historically low violent crime rates. The collaborative response among local, state, and federal agencies demonstrated the priority placed on solving the case. The extensive public engagement, while creating challenges in sorting legitimate information from speculation, also reflected widespread concern and the desire to assist in bringing the perpetrator to justice. Forensic investigators recovered critical physical evidence at the crime scene that would ultimately connect a suspect to the murders. A knife sheath was found at the location where the attacks occurred. This item became significant when forensic analysis detected DNA material on the sheath. The DNA profile obtained from this evidence would later be matched to Brian Christopher Kohberger, identifying him as a suspect. In addition to physical evidence, investigators utilized digital forensics to track movements and establish timelines. Cell phone records became a crucial component of the investigation. Kohberger's mobile device records showed that his phone was in the vicinity of 11-22 King Road during the early morning hours when the murders occurred. Geolocation data placed his device near the residence during the time frame between approximately 4 a.m. and 4:25 a.m. on November 13. Further analysis of his cell phone records revealed a pattern of activity in the area. His device had pinged cell towers near the King Road residence multiple times in the weeks leading up to the attack. This historical data suggested he had been in the vicinity of the house on previous occasions before the night of the murders. The frequency of these pings indicated familiarity with the location. The combination of DNA evidence recovered from the knife sheath and the cell phone geolocation data provided investigators with two independent lines of evidence linking Kohberger to the crime scene. These forensic and digital clues formed the foundation of the case against him, establishing both his physical presence through DNA and his movements through phone records. This convergence of evidence types strengthened the investigative connection between the suspect and the location where the 4 students were killed. Brian Christopher Kohberger was identified as the suspect in the University of Idaho murders. At the time of the crimes, he was a graduate student at Washington State University in Pullman, located approximately 8 miles from Moscow, Idaho. The proximity of his university to the crime scene placed him in the general geographical area where the murders occurred. Kohberger was enrolled in the Department of Criminal Justice and Criminology at Washington State University, pursuing advanced studies in the field. His academic focus involved understanding criminal behavior, justice systems, and investigative processes. This educational background drew public attention once his identity as a suspect became known, as it created an apparent contradiction between his studies and the alleged crimes. Investigators publicly stated that no confirmed motive had been established based on available reports. While the attack was described by law enforcement as targeted, meaning the perpetrator specifically selected the residents or individuals, the precise reasoning behind this targeting was not clarified. Authorities did not elaborate on why these 4 specific victims were chosen or what connection, if any, Kohberger had to Mogen Goncalves Kernodle or Chapin. Another unanswered question involved the 2 surviving roommates. Investigators did not publicly explain why these individuals were not harmed despite being present in the house during the attack. Whether this was intentional selection by the perpetrator, a result of the house layout, or due to other factors remained unaddressed in public statements. The absence of a clear motive became one of the most debated aspects of the case. Following weeks of intensive investigation, law enforcement identified Brian Kohberger as the primary suspect in the University of Idaho murders. On December 30, 2022, approximately 6 weeks after the crimes occurred, authorities arrested Kohberger at his family's residence in Pennsylvania. He had traveled to the East Coast from Washington State, where he had been residing while attending Washington State University. The arrest involved coordination between Idaho investigators and Pennsylvania law enforcement agencies. Kohberger was taken into custody without incident at the family home. Following his arrest, legal procedures required his extradition back to Idaho, where the charges would be formally processed. Extradition proceedings were completed, and Kohberger was transported to Idaho to face the criminal charges. On May 17, 2023, a grand jury in Later County, Idaho, returned an indictment against Brian Kohberger. The indictment included 4 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count for each of the victims: Madison Mogen, Kaylee Goncalves, Zana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. Additionally, the grand jury charged him with 1 count of burglary, related to unlawfully entering the residence at 1122 King Road with the intent to commit the crimes. These charges represented the formal criminal accusations against Kohberger. First-degree murder charges indicated that prosecutors believed the killings were premeditated and intentional. The burglary charge addressed the unlawful entry into the dwelling. The indictment moved the case from the investigative phase into the judicial process, establishing the legal framework for prosecution. Following the indictment, Kohberger entered a not guilty plea, setting the stage for what was expected to be a lengthy trial process. The case proceeded through various pre-trial motions and hearings as both prosecution and defense prepared their respective positions. The trajectory of the case changed significantly on July 2, 2025. Brian Kohberger entered a guilty plea to all charges against him, including the 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of burglary. This plea represented a reversal from his previous not guilty plea and avoided what would have been a lengthy and highly publicized trial. The plea agreement included provisions regarding sentencing. Most significantly, the prosecution agreed not to seek the death penalty, which had been a possibility given the severity of the charges and Idaho law. Instead, the agreement called for life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for the murder convictions. On July 23, 2025, the court formally sentenced Brian Kohberger. He received 4 consecutive life sentences, without the possibility of parole, 1 for each victim. The consecutive nature of the sentences meant they would be served one after another rather than concurrently, though the practical effect was the same given that each was a life term without parole eligibility. In addition to the life sentences, Kohberger received a 10-year sentence for the burglary conviction. The court also imposed financial penalties, though specific amounts were not detailed in publicly available records. These financial components typically include restitution, court costs, and other fees associated with prosecution. The sentencing concluded the criminal proceedings against Kohberger, establishing his legal accountability for the 4 murders. The life sentences without parole ensured he would remain incarcerated for the remainder of his natural life. The University of Idaho murders captured extraordinary public attention, extending far beyond the local Moscow community to national and international audiences. Several factors contributed to this widespread interest and the sustained media coverage that followed the crimes. The brutality of the attack stood as a primary factor. 4 young students killed in a single incident, with dozens of stab wounds inflicted in a concentrated time frame, represented an extreme level of violence. The nature of the murders shocked communities across the country, particularly within university settings, where students and parents confronted fears about campus safety. Moscow, Idaho is a small college town with a population of approximately 25,000 residents. The community had historically experienced low violent crime rates, making these murders particularly jarring. The contrast between the town's peaceful reputation and the severity of the crimes intensified public fascination and concern. Brian Kohberger's background as a criminal justice graduate student added another dimension to public interest. The apparent contradiction between his academic study of criminal behavior and his alleged commission of multiple homicides generated extensive discussion and speculation across media platforms and social networks. Media coverage was relentless and widespread. News organizations provided continuous updates throughout the investigation, arrest, and legal proceedings. Social media platforms amplified public engagement, with users sharing theories, analyzing evidence, and following developments in real time. This digital amplification extended the case's reach globally. Significant questions remained unanswered even after Kohberger's guilty plea and sentencing. The specific motive for targeting these 4 individuals was never publicly established. The reason these particular victims were selected, while 2 other roommates survived, remained unexplained. These unanswered elements left lingering curiosity and continued speculation, sustaining public interest in the case long after its legal conclusion.